Yo, what's up? It's your boy, Mr. AC. And what I got for you guys today is going over primarily, and we are on year number. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, let's go ahead and get started with our 2000 question. Now, the 2000 question is going to differ slightly from the 1999 question. And the reason why is I want you to look at what's given to you versus what was given to you in 1999. If we look at this graph, it says the figure above shows the graph of f prime. That's huge. That's telling us that we are given f prime. And let me put a little stroke, by the way. Since we are giving f prime, there's two things that we could do, right? Let me go ahead and write this real quick right over here. Since we are given f prime, we can go in two directions. We can go backwards or we can go forward. It really just matters what the question is asking us. So let's go ahead and talk about it. And obviously they give us some information here. Find all the values of x for -7 to 7, so that's like the open interval, at which f attains a relative maximum. Really important you think about this. It says f attains a relative maximum. Well, what do we need to know about f in order to get a relative max? Well, we need f prime to change from positive to negative, right? So it should look like this. Positive to negative. Well, what are we given? Well, we are giving f prime. So that's going to make things a lot more manageable for us. We don't need to take the derivative. We don't need to do anything. Since this is f prime, that means anything up here is already positive slope. Anything down here is already negative slope. So what that pretty much means is we just need to analyze this. So for example, at -5, it goes from positive to negative. Ha! We found a relative maximum, but we don't care about that because it's asking for a relative minimum. Let's go to -1 because it's a 0. Well, this goes from negative to positive. We found a relative minimum. Now let's go ahead and go to 5. This goes from positive to positive, so it's neither a relative min or max. So find all the values of f where it attains a relative minimum. Well, guess what? We found it. We found it at -1, so we can write this. All right. Obviously, I'm using my mouse to do all the writing, so if I had a pad it would be easier, but this is what we can write. F has a relative minimum at x equals -1 because f prime changes from negative to positive. So because of that change from negative to positive, that means it has a relative minimum, and we're done. That's part A. We are finished. We don't need to say anything about -5 or 5 because it didn't tell us to justify which ones are not, right? It just says what are the relative mins. We found it. We are done. We're moving on to part B. Now, part B, if you look at part B is the exact same thing that was asked prior. Instead of a relative min, it's asking for a relative max, which is at -5. So I'm not going to write this one out because all you need to write down is f has a relative maximum at x equals -5 because it changes from positive to negative. Capiche? We're done. Sayonara. Moving on to parts. Find all the values of x for which this open interval where f double prime is less than 0. Well, we are given f prime. So now we actually need to take the derivative of this graph and find out when it is negative. So let's take the derivative of this graph. Well, if I take the derivative of this graph, I'm always looking for my zeros. There's a 0 here. There's a 0 here. And there's a 0 here. Just looking on this graph, where are we going to get negative slope, right? We're taking the derivative now of this graph, right? This is a slope of 0, this is a slope of 0, and this is a slope of 0. So where do I have negative slope? Well, I have negative slope from -7 to -3. This slope here is negative, right? If I make a tangent line, all of this is negative. All of this over here is positive. And then all of this right here from here to here is negative. Now you have to be careful because I believe on part A, it told us that it has a horizontal tangent line at 3. This horizontal, vertical tangent line, vertical means it doesn't exist there. So I'm actually gonna write out this entire thing and just write is from -7 to -3. That is the interval that we just wrote out right over here, right? This is the interval right there. from 2 comma 3, from 2 to 3, because we was negative. At 3, it is undefined. It is a vertical tangent line, so I'm not going to include that. Obviously, it doesn't have any slope, right? It's a vertical tangent line, so that's why I broke it up into 2. And then from 3 to 5, because 3 to 5 is also negative in both of these sections here. And then all we need to write down is because f double prime of x is negative, which is kind of stated to us. They pretty much said, hey, when is your second derivative negative? It's negative here, right? So you could see this is where this problem, we kind of were given the information. We just had to find the intervals, and that's pretty much it. You didn't even have to write this down. You just needed to find these intervals that I just listed right here. So hopefully that makes sense to y'all, so we can go ahead and move on to part D. Okay. To answer part D is a little bit more complicated than what they usually would do. We need to find the absolute maximum, which means we need to check our endpoints. Absolute maximum means the biggest y value, right? That's all it means. And it's talking about f. So we get f, f prime, f double prime. We are referring to f here, which is a little bit of an issue, which I'll talk about in a second. I'm going to put -7. I'm gonna put 7 here, and we need to check our endpoints. Well, we already know at -5 is a relative maximum, so I'm gonna put all these 3 here, right? This is your relative max, and we have our endpoints. So the question becomes, well, how do we get these? Well, this is what we would normally do, right? For example, I'm given this graph is f prime. Well, how do I get, let me put the y values here. How do I get back to f? I got to take the antiderivative of this, and it's going to be, right, the upper bound is -7, and down here, we would be given an initial point, right, a starting value, so that we could compare it and put it here, and usually there would be a value here, plus this, don't forget the dx over here. Well, this is a problem, because if I go ahead and minimize everything and go back to part A, they don't give us any starting value. So that means we have to kind of problem solve this in a very unique way. Okay, so now that you saw that we can't do the antiderivative, we're going to have to rely on the fact that they're giving us f prime here, right? So for example, in this problem, they are giving us f prime, and that means a couple of things for us to be aware about. So I'm going to try to explain this to you the best that I can. So this is f prime, f prime right here. Okay, we're going to have to sketch the antiderivative somewhat, sort of. So for example, we need to compare the endpoints. So I'm gonna just write down, let's go over here, -7. I'm gonna write down over here, -5. And then over here, I'm gonna write down 7. And we're just gonna basically compare this by critically thinking through what the derivative and antiderivative should look like. So here's what we do know. At -5, it is a relative maximum. So we know for a fact this is going to be a relative max right here. So then what does that tell us about -7? Well, look at -7. It's starting to plateau. So that means this graph might look something like this, right? Now, obviously, it looks like it might go up or it might go down. We don't know that. But we do know it looks something like this. It's a relative max here. And it's going to look something like this, because this is from positive to negative. So just by drawing the original graph, this is our estimated graph of f, we already know f of -5 is larger than f of -7, because f of -5 is a relative max. -7 cannot be a value we really care about, right? All we really care about now is to compare these next two right here. We need to compare -5 to 7. We need to know which one is bigger, -5 or 7. Well, now this is where we have to go back and do some level of a sketch, right? We need to sketch this and see how does this potentially look like. So all I did was just erase it and just redraw it just a little bit better so that it's more drawn to scale. So now that we talked about why -7 cannot be the absolute maximum, because obviously at -5 it is a relative max, so -7 has to be lower than this. Our job is to think about, well, which one of these two are going to be bigger, right? Well, this is where we have to analyze the graph very carefully. So what I want you to notice is this: from -5 to -1, right, it is in the negative region. That means it's decreasing. I mean, that's why it makes sense that it goes from positive to negative and we get a relative max. So from -5 to -1, we are decreasing right here. And then at this point right here, Again, we don't know. This graph, by the way, could be down here. We don't know that, but it doesn't matter because you're gonna see why when we compare these, it'll all come together and make sense. If you look at -1, it hits 0 and it goes from negative to positive, right? So that means this is going to hit 0. So let me go ahead and sketch it at -1. If I don't know if I said 1, -1, 0. And then from 1, well, guess what? I'm gonna just stop for a moment. From 1 to 2, okay? From 1 to 2, we are increasing like this, okay? Obviously, we don't know how much it's increasing from, right? Maybe this bump is a little bit higher, but from 1 to 2, it's increasing. Okay, now here's the thing. Anything up here is positive. It still means it is increasing. It's just increasing at different slopes, right? So this was pretty steep. This is maybe increasing at a slightly lower speed, but it's still increasing, right? From -2 to 3, you know, we get this vertical. From 3 to 5, it's still increasing. So from 3 to 5, it's still increasing like this, right? Obviously it's increasing at a slower pace, but it's still increasing. And then from 5 to 7, it's increasing even further and faster. So you can see right here, just by analyzing this graph, we are increasing from -1 to 7. Compared to -5 to -1, that means this graph has to keep going up. Therefore, we can just see and conclude that at 7, it's going to be greater than -5 by the fact that our graph, right, this graph right here, f prime of x increases from -1 to -7. So we would just say f prime is increasing from -1 to 7, which is more values than it is decreasing from -5 to -1. Therefore, f of 7 has to be the absolute maximum. So this is the absolute maximum, and this is us figuring this out without having actual values and us problem solving through this just by what the graph was given to us. So hopefully that makes sense. That's a pretty tough one, but hopefully, like I said, just problem solving through this, it kind of makes sense. So hopefully you guys enjoyed. I'm out. Take care. Capiche.